Combat Arts Institute of Australia.
Hi everyone, Ron from Combat Arts Institute of Australia here. It's Friday afternoon. Dojo is quiet. We've got another half an hour or so before people come in and start doing kickboxing and Filipino martial arts on Fridays. Fridays are usually a lot of fun here, so I just thought I'd put some thoughts down before the place gets really busy. So today is a topic that is very close to my heart, which I think I say in every video, but it's because I talk about stuff I care about, I guess. And that is about sparring with students as an instructor. When I started training, let me rephrase. When I started teaching, I was told by several instructors never to spar with students or be very selective with who you spar with. For the reason that if you lose to students in a sparring match, then it gives both you and the school, and maybe the system as well, a bad reputation. And I guess there is some truth to that. But for me, I found that really odd, because my experience with martial arts, and especially with Combat Arts Institute, we have a very open-minded community of practitioners from different styles where everybody trains with everybody. And so it's understood that everybody has their own specialties, and if you go and cross-train in another system, you won't be as good at it. You know, if you're a boxer and you go into a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class, understandable if you lose, and vice versa. But system differences aside, even with students within your own system, you know, there's this common misperception, I feel, in the martial arts community, that, you know, the sensei or the sifu or the grandmaster, after many years of training and honing their skills, should essentially be unbeatable. And if they lose to a student, then the student has surpassed the master, so in a manner of speaking, so to speak. And sometimes that even means that, you know, students leave and go and train elsewhere. And I'm sure every martial artist and every school has probably seen some of those cases. And I think this is a real shame, because it is based on an unrealistic understanding of martial arts, of fighting, and of aging. And I think very often that response from a student reflects a lack of maturity and understanding from the student's part rather than the capability of the instructor. Not always, but sometimes. So I'm going to talk about some of the thoughts that I have on that. Some people may agree, some people may disagree, and that's great. As long as it gets us to talk and think about the issue, then I feel like I've done my job. So let's look at a few examples of why I think it's important for you to spar with your students, and even more so, why it's not always a bad thing if they beat you. The first example is what I call the on-field coach. Right? So a coach's ability, or credibility rather, comes from his or her deep understanding of the sport, rather their ability to currently engage in on-field play. What do I mean by that? How often have you seen the coach of an elite soccer club jump on the field and play as part of the team? Let's say the coach of Manchester United. How often does he actually jump in and compete? Never. What about in rugby? What about in basketball? What about in tennis? How often does Roger Federer's coach jump on the court and say, let us play doubles, or let me fill in for you for a set? It doesn't happen. It simply doesn't happen. People understand that in that context of sport, the coach's credibility comes from their understanding of technique and tactics and the sport, rather than their ability necessarily to perform those. But when it comes to martial arts, all that stuff goes out the window, right? So a boxing coach is expected to outbox his fighter. You know, a kung fu sifu is expected to defeat all of his students. And I feel that in the martial arts that somehow gets neglected. So I think that there comes a point where your ability to coach and your ability to teach should be gauged by your understanding of the system and of technique and strategy, and however that applies to your system, rather than your current ability to fight. Okay, so number one is the on-field coach. Number two is what I call the Great Equalizer. And simply put, time comes for us all. There is no escaping it, and age is the Great Equalizer. And in much the same way, with other sports, we don't see that, but with martial arts, it's expected that the older you get, the more skillful and the better you get, which also, for some people, translates as, you should be a better fighter on the mat. And again, I disagree. There was an interview with some members of the Gracie family a little while ago, and they talked about this, and I really loved their approach to this. So one of the things they mentioned was that I remember there was this famous story about, I think it was Helio Gracie, who kept rolling up until his 90s. And what they explained that actually wasn't entirely accurate. What he would do is pick a student that was probably like a quarter his age, somebody who was 20 or 25, put him in a position and say, okay, try and submit me. Just defend himself for a minute or two, and then say, okay, time is up. And if he didn't get submitted for a minute or two by somebody who was much younger than him, for him that was a victory. And I absolutely agree with that approach. I think that's the right way to look at it. So one of the other arguments arguments or thoughts they shared in that interview was that really for every 10 years that the person you're sparring with is younger than you, you should give them another belt level. And the same thing for every 10 kilos or so that they're heavier than you. All right, so if you're a black belt who is 40 years old and weighs about 75 kilos, and you are sparring or rolling with somebody who is a white belt, but he's 20 years old and weighs, let's say, 120 or 130 kilos, then really you're sparring or you're rolling with another black belt. And some people disagree with that. I actually think that it makes a lot of sense. I don't know any system that can completely neutralize the effects of age and weight. And I believe that anybody who says that is, either dishonest or naive. So age comes to us all, and it affects the way that our body works and how it takes to recover, and our reaction speed and our strength and our explosiveness and our stamina and all the stuff that, that affects our fighting. So pay respect to your elders for their knowledge rather than their ability to fight on the mat at any given time. So that's number two, is the Great Equalizer, which is time. Point number three, and this is probably the one that I relate to the most, is what I call different streams of the same river. Not everybody finds, actually maybe finds is not the right word, not everybody travels the same path when it comes to martial arts, even within the same system. We're all different, and we are all different physically as well as mentally and emotionally. And as a result of that, people resonate with different aspects of the system as well as with different systems. And we can't expect everybody to perform in the same way. And that is the same for teachers. So, just to give some examples, some people have a natural ability to look good and to look clean when they perform techniques. Maybe they're a bit more athletic and they're a bit more nimble and they can make everything look easy and beautiful. And they may not be great fighters or great teachers, but when it comes to demonstrations, those are the people that you want to have, because everything they do is textbook perfect. And then you may have people who have, killer instinct. They're naturally fit. They're naturally strong. Their timing and distancing is just naturally great. And they make for great fighters, even though they may not look as clean or they may not be able to teach as well. And I've trained with some people like that who are phenomenal fighters. But as teachers, I couldn't get a lot out of them because it wasn't necessarily what they specialized in. And lastly, and I feel that this is the category that I belong to more than anything. Some people have a way of communicating and a way of teaching. And while they have an understanding of technique that is very deep, even though they may not have the killer instinct that fighters have. And as such, they may not be the best people for demos or the best fighters, but they make very, very great teachers or good coaches. And I think a great example of this is probably the most famous MMA coach in history, or the modern era at least, which is Greg Jackson. And he is without a doubt a very capable and experienced martial artist. But that is not what he's known for. What he's known for is his ability to coach people into becoming champions. You know, he's probably coached more champions than I think anybody else in MMA. And he's got a stable of absolutely phenomenal fighters. But nobody questions his ability to fight. You know, he's made his claim to fame as a coach. So, point number 3, different streams of the same river, is that everybody finds their own, vocation within the martial arts. And you should respect everybody regardless, because everybody has something to share or to teach with you, whether that's through watching them demonstrate, fighting with them, or learning from them. And you can't expect, and I'm much the same way as what we said before about the on-field coach, I'm sure that Greg Jackson doesn't jump in and does sparring with all of his champions, and nor is he expected to. Instead, he will watch them spar and give them feedback about how to get better. And it's also worth noting that he is not a UFC champion himself, right? So he's a coach, not a fighter, primarily. And I think that's really important. Last one is what I call context is king. Consider what is the context in which you're sparring, right? If you're a white belt and you don't have any experience, and you're on your 3rd or 4th week of training, and you absolutely smash an instructor, okay, maybe there is some issue there, and maybe that instructor is not at the quality they should be for that system. I don't know. Maybe not, right? In that case, you may have a valid reason to question what is happening at that dojo, or question that instructor. However, if you're really experienced, you've been training for a long time, you happen to spar with your instructor and you catch him on a bad day, which, secret guys, we all have them, then you may want to think twice before you jump ship, right? The other thing to think about is also what I mentioned before about sparring kind of cross-discipline. So, my focus has always been self-defense, and I do believe that you need to spar and spar regularly in order to be a good self-defense practitioner, but it's certainly not the focus of my training. So, if I go into an MMA class where we do primarily, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, then I don't really feel that bad if I get tapped out, because it's not what I train for, and it's not my specialty. I love it, and I love training in it, but I'm not going to get too caught up about being the next Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champ, because it's not my context. Okay. Now, there's also a flip side to this, right? As an instructor, you do need to have standards. That goes without saying. And sometimes you do find those instructors who refuse to let anybody demonstrate anything on them. They don't let anybody, whether it's a student or another instructor, demonstrate on them or spar with them or do anything with them. And I think that kind of perpetuates the myth, and again does more bad than good to martial arts and to the students. Sometimes it's got to do with ego, or feeling that's beneath their station, or simply being scared to be shown up, or to show that that they can lose as well. And in my opinion, that is an even better indicator of the quality of an instructor. If an instructor is willing to put himself in a position where they might lose, it says a lot about their willingness to take risk, about their confidence in their own ability, and about them being open-minded, as opposed to somebody who refuses to do that 100% of the time. So Why should you be beating your instructors up? Well, a couple of reasons. Everything we mentioned before. And lastly, also the fact that it means that you are improving, right? So a really good way of gauging our own progress in the martial arts is by how we perform against people who are more skilled than us. And as long as you're consistently getting better, that's really what it's all about. We're all here for self-improvement. So a few thoughts about, sparring your instructors, whether you should or shouldn't, and my feelings about that. I hope you got something out of it. And speaking of which, we've got a few people about to rock up, so I'm going to go and do some sparring myself. It's a Friday night, so I hope you have a very great weekend. Rest up. Have fun. Horse!